There is something very definite about the click of an SPD cleat into a pedal. Reassuring then that when push comes to shove, or is that when push comes to pull, you'll be guaranteed to be attached. It's that very connection that many riders also love when they can pick up their wheels in an instant. There are simply so many benefits to using clipped-in pedals. It's strange why anybody would choose otherwise. I have friends, colleagues and racers worldwide who actually champion the cause for using them. Except, well, let me explain. Well, it has absolutely nothing to do with history. Even though my colleague Doddy says that Shimano revolutionized the way we can ride modern mountain bikes because they invented some kind of quick-release pedal in the 1980s. I'd argue that it was actually eMTBs themselves that revolutionised where we ride, not pedals. It was suspension that enabled us to conquer rough terrain, and not clips. Has there in fact been a revolution in the way we ride our eMTBs? I don't think so. I think we might ride differently, but it's arguable whether we ride better. If you're fast, regardless of whether you're clipped in or on flats. Now, there was a really interesting debate between Doddy and Blake on GMBN Tech last year about why Blake loves flats and why Doddy likes clipped-in shoes. And let's start actually with shoes, because Doddy argues that the shoe is critical, and we have a situation where downhill style SPD shoes are kind of flat and sort of like flats. I mean, why wouldn't they? And then there's cross-country style SPD shoes, which in Doddy's words are a little bit uncomfortable. He goes further and, quote, "A decent SPD trail shoe, on the other hand, will change the way you can ride. Or indeed ride at all, it seems." Now here's the key part about trail clip shoes, and Doddy says they are stiff to be able to get the power down, and also have flex in the toe for when you're pushing the bike up. And yes, well, more in common with fell running shoes. You need to be able to hike up some pretty radical terrain on modern mountain bikes in order to get to some of the best stuff. So I guess what Doddy and many other people in the world are saying is that the great thing about trail SPD shoes is that they enable you to push your bike comfortably uphill. Except though, that on an eMTB, once you've switched it on that is, we actually ride those hills. Now, Blake's argument about shoes was much simpler. He says that, well, there's less faff. You don't actually have to worry about what shoes you bring when you go mountain biking. You can actually ride in any shoes you want. So having covered shoes, the argument then turns to the type of rider. Now, Blake, being a free rider, dirt jumper, slope style, whatever rider is, all his friends and himself ride flat pedals. Blake says he loves nothing better than getting his leg or his foot out, like myself. But Doddy, on the other hand, is a different type of rider, and you have to appreciate that. Blake goes on to say it's all about foot out, flat out, and, well, he says you can't actually do that on clipped-in pedals, but I would argue that there are incredibly stylish and fast people in the world that ride in clips. Having said that, well, you see, there are no guarantees in mountain biking. A stray rock, a troublesome route leaking some juice, an off-camber that's so cunning, it'll have a clipped-in rider sliding sideways the moment they set eyes on it. A flat pedal rider will have spotted that cunning camber, will have slipped a foot for balance in a millisecond, that all-important one that is the difference between riding and sliding. A dab, a push, it's all good, but get your cleats in that clay and hey, you ain't going nowhere. Now, it's at this point that the discussion goes post-ride. Blake, well, he says the flat pedals, they simplify your life. You go for your ride, you get home, chuck the bike in the shed, and it's good to go next time. Doddy, on the other hand, and apologies if I'm incorrect, Doddy, but, well, he seems to spend more time in the workshop than on the trails. But enough about workshops. What do people say about the ride characteristics of flats versus clips? Well, some people say that in clips you can get more flow and that you're unhindered over rough terrain. I'd actually argue otherwise, but here's a few other things. They say that when you're pedaling on clips, you can maneuver the bike around and that it's a really efficient way. Do you know what? I totally get that argument. You can see it visually. However, it does depend on the situation. Such things as off cambers or tight, wet, rooty corners. If you take your foot out on an SPD, can you get it back in? The thing is, it's not even a question with flats. On flats, it's said that you have to weight the pedals. Well, actually, it's the wheels that you have to weight. That's the skill. Even though my colleague behind the camera there seems to think it's definitely the pedals that you weight. Well, folks, let's know. Do you weight the wheels or the pedals? Anyhow, that all depends on the geometry, the suspension tune, and your shock. It's not quite about weighting the pedals, Jack. Do you know what? When it comes to the skills part that I find really intriguing. Now, Blake seems to think that you can actually learn better techniques with flat pedals, such as bunny hopping. Whereas Doddy is like, well, you can actually dance the bike around more, much better on clips. What I would say would be Danny McCaskill, Chris Ackrig, Jack Carthy, dancing the bike around. There's no argument, dude. No argument. Oh, and there was one more, which was climbing up super steep terrain is where the SPD comes in. Well, actually, there's a bit of give and take there because you have the likes of Vouliers and Burrell who ride e-bikes on some really crazy things. And also, you've got the likes, as I mentioned, of McCaskill and Ackrig who can do similarly bonkers things on flats. So it's in the balance, that one. Now, having ridden behind many world-class riders, I do have to say that it's an incredible sight, the way they move the bike around when they're clipped in. At the same time, I've also had the fortune of having ridden behind Sam Hill on flats. That is, until the point where he dives in to some horrible, nasty rock. And there was Sam Hill, gone.
And there was Sam Hill.
So I'm kind of thinking, do you know what? Maybe it's where we ride that is the important factor here. So you might be asking, why do I ride flats? Well, I think it's all about freedom. Freedom to have your foot forward or back or clawing the edge of a pin with but a fraction of your rubber slyly keeping you on track when many would think the game was over. That fraction of pressure to keep you in touch with the bike when your arms are heading east and your legs west in a tangle of roots so bad that, well, as Blake says, he likes to express himself. But folks, this is eMTB that we're talking about, and that liveliness that people say you can get out of an SPD pedal, well, liveliness actually comes from the suspension design of the bike and not your shoe. And let's face it, we ride in different places. And when we're climbing, we do that sat down rather than stood up. And traction comes from the added weight of an eMTB. And in many ways, we're more like trials riders. Actually, but as Jack points out, trials riders stand up, don't they? Good point. Now, being a flat pedal rider, it's always bothered me whether you can actually be more precise clipped in. Also having ridden downhill, I know that downhill is a calculated place, calculated line choices. But having said that, you see the likes of Sam Hill and Chris Kowarek, the biggest winning margins ever. At this point, I want to turn to another colleague of ours, Rich Payne. In a contrast between flats and clips, and in regard to flats, he says, I was wild, I was almost more relaxed, and 9 seconds faster. But folks, I'm sure it's all about profit and loss. Are clips actually better than flats in any particular place? Yes, I'm sure they are. But then I think that flats are better than clips in many other places. Look, I'm not going to get evangelical about a pair of pedals. However, what about if you're in a remote part of northwest Scotland when push actually does come to shove? That unknown world of bogs, riverbeds and unpredictability. Maybe it's just the fact that I've tried to ride clips a million times and failed. Having said this, I certainly don't subscribe to this whole thing of clips are for cooks or that flats are for cool people. That's just I think first and foremost, you need to be a good rider, read lines, find lines, understand flow. The skill is to be able to ride both. Now there's one final point which my man Jack just pointed out, is that the story goes that on clipped-in pedals you can actually pedal across rough ground far smoother in clips. But remember folks, we've now got the added weight and the motor of an eMTB, so maybe that argument is no longer true. But the bottom line, clips or flats? Guys, like I said, I would love to be able to master clipped in. I would love to be able to ride both equally fast, but like I said, I failed. But guys, let's know what you think. What do you ride and what would you like to ride? And do you think that one is better than the other? Don't forget to subscribe to EMBN for more content. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, or if you don't like this video, don't bother.